Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we'll be talking about a topic that quite frankly needs to be addressed at this point. And it's really a topic that I think most AoE2 players can agree on, that infantry is just in a poor state at the moment. There's no better way to put it. Infantry, specifically the militia, the champion line, is just not on par with some of the other options in the game. In this video, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at infantry and actually compare it with the other options in each different age. So starting from Dark Age to Imperial Age, and we'll take a look at how infantry are facing up against the other units that are available to specific civilizations. Then we'll also take a look at infantry civilizations and which ones perform the best and how infantry finds its niche place in the meta. So we'll give it some credit where credit is due. Now, starting off in the Dark Age, I personally think that obviously the militia is a decent option, but it's a decent option for the fact that there's no other unit to make. Militia is the only military unit you can make in Dark Age, and I think it serves its purpose as an early game harassed unit. It moves a little bit faster than a villager, so in theory you could trap and chase down a villager if you come in with 2 or 3 militias. However, the militia is also quite a big investment. If you think about it, it costs 80 resources a piece, and you need to make the barracks, which is another 175 res. So you need to invest over 250 resources to make any meaningful drush work, drush being Dark Age rush with militia. And while this used to be a very popular strategy in the past, drush past castle or drush into Feudal Age play is simply not that popular nowadays for a few reasons. Number one being that the meta has developed to a much quicker pace. People are getting to Feudal Age much faster, and so you have less time in the Dark Age for the militia to do work. If you have less time to attack your opponent with your military, then you're getting less value for it. On top of that, people learned how to quick wall or small wall their resources, and so most of the time the militia won't get any value besides just hitting a few walls and potentially forcing some repairs. Overall, I feel like the only purpose of the militia in Dark Age is to gain the map control, put pressure on your opponent, and maybe disturb him from doing some kind of rush, or disturb him and throw him off his game. You're not going to get that much value off of it most of the time, and quite frankly, at the highest level, right now the militia rush is more or less just slowing you down more than gaining you any advantage. So at the moment, it's quite out of the meta. However, I could see that it's a decent option in some specific cases. Overall, I think it's a decent option and probably something worth going for sometimes. It is worth noting that there's no other military unit to compare the militia to something else in the Dark Age, and so it's either you make the militia in Dark Age or you just simply go Feudal Age, and right now most people are opting to go to the Feudal Age. Now, if you take a look at infantry in the Feudal Age, I will talk about the spearman line briefly. I think the spearman line is in a great spot right now. Spears in Feudal Age are seeing a lot of play, both as a defensive option with, spears to counter scouts, and even as an offensive option with spears and skirms being a popular rush tactic, or even archers and skirms if you're up against spear scouts. So the spear is in a great spot, and I think the main reason for the spear being in a good spot is because number one, it doesn't require any upgrades. Number two, it has a clear identity as being an anti-cav unit, and number three, it has a pretty high movement speed. It moves faster than a skirm and an archer and moves way faster than a militia. So with all this in mind that keeps the spear as a pretty solid unit in Feudal Age, let's then go ahead and compare it to the men-at-arm. The men-at-arm number one requires an upgrade, which is 100 food and 40 gold, and that's quite a setback in Feudal Age. It's 140 res before you get any value from a Feudal Age unit. Otherwise, you have just the Dark Age militia to play with. On top of that, it moves slower than a spear and actually slower than an archer, so you don't even get the fast movement speed that the spear gets, meaning that you have to pay for this unit, and it moves slower than pretty much every other Feudal Age unit in the game. That means that to get value with the men-at-arm, your opponent has to actively be within distance of you, or you have to somehow force him to fight you, and both of those cases are quite difficult to achieve. The thing about movement speed is that it's really hard to quantify. A unit being faster can sometimes be completely negligible if you're forced to take the fight, otherwise your villagers go down. However, in another case, the unit being faster means that it never gets hit by the slower unit, and so sometimes movement speed is insane and sometimes it's quite useless. But in the case of the men-at-arm, because every other unit moves faster than it gets kited by every single unit, and if you don't want to fight the men-at-arm, you can just run away with your other units. So in Feudal Age, the men-at-arm, although it's a strong unit with 6 attack and 45 HP, really can't get any value unless your opponent is actively playing into it. Now, where I will give the men-at-arms credit is that they do a pretty good job of breaking buildings and of killing villagers. However, even in those aspects, villagers can run away when they're low HP, and although the men-at-arm moves faster, if you have a few archers that defend the villagers, you can just pull them away when they're low HP, and then the one men-at-arm that goes to chase will take a lot of damage from the archers or from the enemy scouts or from other villagers alike. And so chasing down villagers in Feudal Age is a lot harder to do when there's enemy military on the field. And even when it comes to breaking buildings, villagers can easily out-repair men-at-arms. In fact, one villager out-repairs 3 generic men-at-arms with pretty significant ease. You need 3 men-at-arms and a scout or 4 men-at-arms to break through 1 villager repairing, and even in those cases, the other guy or the opponent can just go ahead and repair with 2 villagers, or even just wall behind with more palicide. And if you think about how many resources the 3 men-at-arms or 4 men-at-arms will take, 3 times 80 plus 100 food, 40 gold to the upgrade, so 140 plus 3 times 80, you do the math, it is a lot of resources to cover, and I don't think that forcing a few extra walls is going to pay that back. And so as you can see, men-at-arms in Feudal Age are just not comparable to other units. They might actually be the worst military option to go for, and yet we still see some men-at-arm play in higher level because some civilizations do get really strong bonuses allowing you to put the pressure. So the one saving grace for the men-at-arms is that it's probably the fastest and the most powerful rush you can go for. So although it's expensive and it's hard to justify most of the time, with the right situation, with the right circumstances, it could pay back if you're able to kill a couple vills, which the men-at-arm rush can do in some cases, which is fair enough. This isn't a video of ripping on the infantry line, I promise. I will give them grace where grace is due, and honestly, I think that the men-at-arms can be a deadly rush in the Feudal Age in some cases. Late Feudal Age, they are not really an option because again, they are very slow. So even if you pick up supplies, playing late Feudal men-at-arms, I've tried it, they even died to skirmishers because skirmishers, although doing 1 damage, can easily kite them back. And again, skirmishers in Feudal do 1 damage. If they get fletching, you need to get armor to keep that 1 damage. So if you want to go with men-at-arms, you have to really invest into them, and even if you do that, the skirmisher moves faster and thus can kite you down. It is really an uphill battle for the men-at-arm in Feudal Age. Okay, Feudal Age behind us, let's move on to the Castle Age. This is where I think that the long swordsman gets a little bit more value. This is where the power spike of infantry can be seen at its highest point. Long swordsman, if done with a surprise rush of like 4 barracks all in long swordsman, can be really strong in early castle for the reason of gambesons. Gambesons coming in as a new technology, giving extra pierce armor to the longswords, makes the balance between skirms and long swordsmen much better in favor of the longswords. The longswords now only take 1 damage to elite skirmishers in the Castle Age if they get the gambesons upgrade. It also helps them tank the TC fire, tanks crossbow fire, and towers alike. And so longswordsmen really do quite well in early Castle Age as playing the role of a brute force infantry that can break buildings and damage villagers quite quickly. They're also pretty cheap since you have supplies at this point. So this is probably the best use of the infantry line as far as an offensive option in Castle Age. However, the same problem still occurs as in Feudal Age. Number 1, you have to pay for all of these upgrades. You have to pay for the longswordsman tech, you have to pay for squires, and you also have to pay for gambesons and supplies for that matter. So those are 4 techs you need to get before you can even get maximum value out of your men-at-arms, and that's not considering any blacksmith technologies, which are also crucial. The addition of squires does allow you to chase down archers and skirmishers though, so as you can see with gambesons and squires, longswordsmen are actually somewhat decent in the Castle Age. They fare better against some of their counters from the Feudal Age, although as I mentioned earlier, you have to pay for all of these benefits, and this is the problem I have with infantry. Every single time they've been given a buff over the last few years, it always comes at a cost. It never comes for free. And I think at this point, when a unit is as weak and as underplayed as the infantry line, it's probably time to give them something for free. And I don't think they need a big buff or anything like that. I think a small buff, especially to the movement speed, can make them a very viable unit, because I see the movement speed being their number 1 debilitating factor compared to other units. Their movement speed makes it so archers can kite them, and even in the Castle Age with squires, archers with the 7 range can easily hit and run, and then as the 7 tiles of range get closed down by the longswords, the crossbows can be behind monks or behind their TC and have other defensive tools to play with. And so the longswords are in a situation where they either have to chase down the crossbows and put themselves at risk, or just completely avoid them altogether. Both of those options don't really help you get value out of the longswords more often than not. And what's even more interesting is that the knights also do very well against longswords. Although in an even resource fight the longswords fare pretty well against knights, the knights have the movement speed advantage by quite a significant margin. So the knight can take any fight against a longsword and can simply go back and heal once it's at literally 1 HP. Monks can heal it back up to full HP, and the longswords that got killed in that fight will not come back to life. They are completely gone and the resources are wasted. And so the knights can go in, take damage, go back, heal, kill a few longswords in the process, and rinse and repeat. As you can see in high level, knights will absolutely destroy longswords. Going into the Imperial Age, you might think that things get better for the 200 swordsman and the champion, but unfortunately it just simply does not. 200 swordsman is a in-between upgrade for the champion line, and it honestly does not fare too well. 60 HP and 11 damage is not very impressive stat-wise, so you have to kind of jump to the champion as fast as possible, and I will admit the champion has pretty impressive stats for the most part, especially when you include a fully upgraded champion with gambesons. That puts it to 70 HP and 6 pierce armor. Those are the 2 most important stats for the champion, because again, the biggest threat to them is really the ranged damage. So at 7 HP and 6 pierce armor, you're once again taking 1 damage from skirmishers, and you're somewhat tanky against other archer threats. So the champion sees decent play in Imperial Age, however, it once again suffers from the same problems the infantry line suffered from in the past ages. You have to pay for 200 swordsmen, and then you have to pay for champion. And although the recent buffs made these upgrades come in much quicker, they're still rather expensive, and you're still left with a unit that gets kited by every other unit in the game. What makes matters worse though is that the hand cannoneer is available in the Imperial Age as yet another counter to the infantry line, and so the champion is already countered by arbalest, already countered by heavy cavalry like cavalier and paladin, and now has another counter that has been introduced in the Imperial Age, the hand cannoneer. And so it just seems like at every age of the game, from Dark Age to Imperial Age, the champion is being countered by several units, and it's being held back by the expensive upgrades and the fact that it's a slow moving unit in general. All of these factors make the infantry line very unappealing, and honestly it's at the point where going infantry is such a big risk that a lot of times, even when you have an infantry civilization and the situation might seem perfect to go infantry, a lot of times you just don't really want to risk it because it takes so long to get there and it takes so many resources to get there to a fully upgraded champion that even in the late game you probably want to look towards other options. Let me give you the example of a few infantry civilizations and you'll see just how underplayed the champion line really is. Think about the Japanese. Most of the time their arbalest, skirms, and halbs see way more play than the champion. Think about the Vikings. How often do you see Viking champions being the opening play? It's almost always going to be arbalest and skirm, maybe in some cases chieftain pikemen, and then in other cases you'll see berserks and champions later on. Champion is just not a unit you can get into in early imp, so most of the time even the infantry civs will go for their other options first, and then maybe if the situation is perfect, after a few minutes they might start teching into champion, and even then it's a 50-50 whether they will even go for the infantry or not depending on the state of the game. Now the last thing I want to mention for this video is that you have to be very careful when calling for buffs with the infantry line. I do a lot of coaching, as you know, and I've coached people of different elo brackets from 600 elo all the way up to 2k elo, and there's a general trend that the lower elo you go, the better the champion line is. And the reason for that is because the lower elo players, or the lower elo you go, the less they're going to be punishing things like movement speed, the less they're going to be kiting, and the less they're going to be picking their battles. So in lower elos, infantry is absolutely insane. It's really strong because it's a cheap unit that has good fighting stats and runs in with very little counterplay. They're also not utilizing monks very effectively, and so the counters to the longsword or the counters to the men-at-arms in Feudal Age are not as prevalent as the counters would be, or as those same counters would be at a higher elo bracket. And so if you randomly give the infantry line like an extra 20 HP across the board, that will help a little bit or a decent amount in high elo, but that would make them absolutely broken in lower elo. So you have to be very subtle with how you go about buffs as infantry units, but for me personally, if you want my opinion on it, I definitely think it's overdue for a buff that should be free, like no more upgrades that I need to pay for. I would much rather see the infantry line get a subtle buff to the movement speed or some other stats and just make it enough to where the infantry is viable, but not too much where it's broken at lower elo brackets. It's a very delicate matter, but I think it's due for some kind of change because the infantry across the board and across elo brackets is seeing less play compared to its other counterparts. And let's be honest, the infantry is a generic unit line that every single civilization has access to a certain degree. So it's kind of unfair that this unit line does not see any play at all or very little play. It would make the game a lot more fruitful and a lot more diverse if we give this unit a little bit of a buff to where it sees more play across the board, and it can really spice things up in the meta, turning it from a archer and cavalry to an archer, infantry, and cavalry setup for generic unit lines. Let me know what you guys think about the state of infantry in AoE2. Did I hit all the correct points in this video? Did I miss anything? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you want more content from me, check out my Twitch channel for my live streams and my Patreon for extensive guides and exclusive content. Thank you so much for watching the video. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.